Hello, biker. I grew up on Staten Island, New York. This incident happened on October 31st, 1975, when I was just 6 years old. I was abducted in the middle of the night. Oddly, I really wasn't scared. At the time, I'd never heard of UFOs or aliens, as they're described in pop culture. I was an inquisitive child and willingly cooperated with my abductors. I called them the ant people because they looked like really big ants to me at the time. When I told my parents, they just laughed, and I never felt harmed by what happened and grew up to be a content and normal person. The ant people performed what I can best describe as a medical examination. They didn't speak, but they did smile. The only uncomfortable part was being forced to sit in a fetal position for quite a while. It was pretty painful. The beings were about the same height as I was as a child. I wasn't familiar with the UFO phenomena back then, but I was around 18 when I saw a paperback about UFOs at a friend's house. This book had drawings that matched my memory of the ant people exactly, which was, well, pretty freaky at the time. I've never told anyone this before except my parents back when I was a kid. It really did happen. Today, I'm a 55-year-old Ivy League educated lawyer, and I tend to be a pretty serious guy, but I definitely believe in aliens. Signed, Thomas. Hello, biker. I lived in Tujunga, California at the time. This happened beginning on July 1st, 1993, at around midnight. I was suddenly awakened from a deep sleep. My room was lit up and the big window was open. When I sat up, I saw small, glowing, childlike beings about 3 feet tall. They seemed happy and I felt safe. Not scared in the least. My boyfriend was asleep in the bed next to me and never woke up. One little being came down in a light that descended into my backyard. My dogs were with me and they didn't bark and stayed by my side. I got out of bed and went to the sliding glass door, and as I reached it, the little beings were there to greet me. I still wasn't afraid. I walked outside, but my 2 dogs stayed inside, which really wasn't normal for them, and they usually bark at everything. These beings were playing around me. It kind of felt like they were having fun and trying to make me laugh. They seemed pleased and pulled me toward a light. They led me into a tunnel of light, and I went up into it. I don't really remember anything after that. I believe this happened for 3 consecutive nights. On the 3rd night, I was awakened by a tall, bald man wearing strange, white and silver clothing. He kind of looked like the statue of a man found at Gobli Tepe. He'd come to get me again, but I was tired and didn't want to go. So I grabbed a pillow and threw it at him, and I said, "I don't want to go anymore." And that was the last time I saw them. Later, when I watched the TV show Ancient Aliens, I saw that statue and realized it looked just like it, which is why I decided to share this. I also had a small, triangular incision on the inside of my right ankle after the events. None of the beings ever spoke. It was like they communicated everything by feelings. Thanks for letting me share. Signed, Lori. Hello, biker. In 1987, I experienced an event that I later recalled under hypnosis. After the regression, I was able to remember additional detail, including that I'd missed about 3 hours during the incident. I was living in Arizona, near the Santa Catalina Mountains. And one afternoon, while sitting in a lounge chair on our back porch, I suddenly realized I was being drawn into a craft by two small, alien-like beings. The next thing that I remembered, I was walking to a table inside a small craft. A guide greeted me there and gave me something to drink. It kind of seemed like a stimulant because I wasn't sleepy afterwards, and the taste was, actually pleasing. I was then taken out of the craft and found myself standing on top of a hill. It was dark, but I noticed this light near a cavern. As I approached, I saw a man dressed in a red but military-style jumpsuit. My guide seemed to know him. He wore a patch and he carried an automatic weapon. We walked into a tunnel beside a large hill or a mountain and met another guard there in red. There was a computerized checkpoint with two cameras on either side. And to my left, there was a groove where a small transit vehicle carried people further into the mountain. And to my right was a long hallway lined with offices. We took that transit car and we traveled for what felt like a very long time to another secure area. There I was instructed to step onto a device, kind of resembling a scale, and face a computer screen. Lights flashed and numbers computed, and then a card with holes punched into it was issued. It appeared to be some kind of ID card. My guide told me that we had entered level 1 of the facility. I was later transported to a lower level. There I saw more armed guards. Down another hall I noticed this horrible, putrid smell. There were tanks with computerized gauges and a large arm-like device extending from tubing into the tanks. There, in a large laboratory-like room, I saw a small gray being with its back to me, working at a computer. There I was told to sit at a table in the middle of the room. A man dressed like a doctor then entered, wearing a white lab coat with a badge. Now this room, it felt very cold, and I became upset and I began to cry and tremble. And I suddenly felt a stabbing pain. I screamed, and when I did, the doctor stood next to me, and he rubbed something on my stomach. The pain immediately subsided, and soon I became drowsy, and I was returned to the porch. When I woke up, I was lying on that porch by the door. For several months after that day, I sensed something had happened, but I couldn't comprehend it, which is why I sought medical help. I've had no other encounters, though I believe I may in the future, and I'll keep you updated if anything changes. Signed, Charles. Hello, Tattooed Biker. I'll keep this short. We had just started high school, and we're doing newspaper deliveries on our bicycles about 6 days a week, taking turns. We usually got up around 4 a.m. so we could finish and be back in time for school. On Saturdays, we rotated duties, so the kid who was off would go over to the others' houses after they finished delivering, just doing typical boys stuff. One Saturday, I happened to be off, and I woke up around 5 a.m., ate, dressed, and then rode my bike over to my friend's house. It was quiet when I arrived. Usually he and his brother would already be outside. I walked into the yard and found the front door ajar, and the house was dead silent. The parents were still asleep. It was just after dawn, around 6 a.m. during the winter. When I walked into the living room, my two friends were both sitting on the sofa, wide-eyed and clutching makeshift weapons. One had an old sword that his dad had kept around, and the other a golf club. They told me they'd come back from deliveries around 5:30, pushed their bikes into the garage, and as they did, something started wailing behind the car. The garage was a separate building. At the far end, it was partitioned with diamond mesh fencing where the bikes were stored. The lights in the garage were off, They described a being standing behind the car, almost ceiling height, very thin, long arms, a big head, and very long fingers. They said it looked like a typical tall gray. And in the seconds they stood frozen, it began scratching or hacking at the garage door with those long fingers. Then they ran into the house and grabbed whatever they could, and sat there on the sofa, frozen in terror. I hadn't been there long after it happened. Also, their bull terrier and fox terrier were nowhere to be seen when I arrived. We all waited together for sunrise, and at about 8 a.m. we went in to check the garage. There was nothing inside except long, thin slashes across the inside of the metal garage door, shallow grooves that had separated the paint. After that, we didn't talk about it much. It just became a story that we told at school, and most people never believed it. About 2 years later, at a house party, I casually brought the morning up again. But both friends acted like I was crazy. One looked at me like I'd said something strange, and the other acted like it was a weird question. Their reaction made me feel very alienated. And this wasn't the first time that I've noticed this sort of memory wipe or odd reaction around certain memories from that time. Any thoughts would be welcome. Signed, Tyler. Hello, biker. This all started in the late winter of 1978. There were 3 of us. Myself, Ronnie, and Tom, and we were working at an outdoor education program high in the San Bernardino Mountains. The program used a former summer camp located in a saddle of the range, reached by the rim of the World Highway. The road runs along the western edge of the camp with a steep drop-off on the other side, and nearby are narrow, rock-filled canyons that plunge toward the Los Angeles basin. We snuck out to an early rockfall just before midnight because the view of the city lights below was, well, simply spectacular. The Santa Ana winds had cleared the basin, giving us a crystal clear view from about 7,000 feet all the way down to the ocean. The city lights looked like a glowing, multicolored carpet. The major roads like brilliant threads in the ocean, a dark, empty edge. We stood there in a loose circle, and Ronnie pulled out one of his hand-rolled joints. As he waved his hand and told a story, I followed the red cherry arc through the air, and, well, that's when I noticed a bright, orangish light coming over the top of the mountain behind us. It backlit the ridge and moved down our side of the range, following the canyon out toward the basin. At first, there was no sound. As it grew closer, though, I heard a noise like air being ripped apart. Not like an aircraft, but a sudden vacuum. The object was vaguely pumpkin seed shaped, with a bright reddish-orange glow at the thicker end, and an orangish white vapor trailing behind it. It flew about 100 feet above the mountain, lit the ground beneath it, and followed the canyon contour down. When it reached roughly 2,000 feet above the basin, it leveled out and headed west toward the ocean, dropping 4,000 to 5,000 feet in just a few seconds. The craft was clearly visible and moving very fast. We also saw the running lights of a small plane ahead of it. As we watched it, the UFO rapidly decelerated and then stopped right next to the small plane. From there at our vantage point, it appeared to be at the same altitude and extremely close to the aircraft. After matching the plane's speed and vector for about 3 seconds, the craft suddenly accelerated, turned left, and then disappeared westward over the Pacific Ocean toward Mexico, covering the eastern part of the basin to Long Beach and out of sight in just a couple of seconds, leaving a faint orange plasma trail. We all stood there stunned, and then panic set in. Ronnie crushed out the joint and put it away. We all ran back to our cabins at full speed, and we didn't speak about it until we could be together alone. We had seen weird things before, but nothing like that. Stuck in the mountains with no TV or radio, we couldn't find any information about it at the time. Now that sighting became a pivot point for the three of us. Something we had always tried to understand, but never really could. After the semester, we split up for the summer. Ronnie went to work as a wildland firefighter. Tom took a job off in Hawaii, and I went back to Big Bear. And then things got very strange. Ronnie died fighting the Spanish ranch fire near San Luis. And less than 2 weeks later, Tom disappeared off the coast of Hawaii, reportedly swept out to sea by a rogue wave. His body never recovered. Losing both friends within just a month or so of that sighting shook me to the core. For a long time, I avoided situations where I could be harmed by fire, earth, water, or air. I still don't know what we saw that night. It sure changed my life. I've even visited Ronnie's accident site. Tom may or may not still be alive. I've kind of always had a hunch he might have staged his disappearance, but that's a whole different story. Thanks for reading. Signed, Richie.
He's got scars on his arms, flames on his chest, rides a steel horse, won't ever rest. Chasing whispers through the foggy pines, searching for truths that slip through time. Moonlight bends where he rolls, the shadows speak. They've got souls, ancient shadows, leather and lore. He's knocking on the other world's door. Bigfoot's howl, dog man's glare, men in black just vanishing there.